There was a grand piano in the hotel lobby, black and polished like glass. No one ever played it. It was just there, for show, like the chandelier, like the gold-rimmed mirrors, like the smile on the receptionist's face after a 12-hour shift. Daniel knew the piano better than anyone. He wasn't a guest, he wasn't management. He was the one who emptied the trash before the sun came up, the one people passed by without looking. But he always paused at that piano, every single night. He would wipe it gently with a cloth. Not just the top, he would clean the keys too, one by one. His fingers would linger just for a second, and if no one was around, he would hum, quietly, like a secret. Most nights no one noticed, but one night someone did. Her name was Madison. She had just taken over as the hotel's new general manager. Young, sharp, expensive heels. She didn't walk through the lobby, she moved through it like she was late for something more important. She stopped when she saw him. He was standing near the piano, not touching it, just looking. She raised an eyebrow, like she wasn't sure what she was seeing. "You planning to play that?" she asked. Her voice wasn't mean, but it wasn't friendly either. The kind of tone you use when you're half joking, but mostly not. Daniel didn't answer right away. He just smiled a little and said, "I used to." She tilted her head. "Used to?" "I studied music," he added, "a long time ago." That was the first time anyone at that hotel ever heard him say more than 2 words. Madison let out a quiet laugh. "Well, if you ever decide to play again, make sure you're off the clock. We're not paying for concerts." She kept walking, the moment passed. But something stayed with him. It wasn't what she said. It was the way she looked at him. Like she didn't believe a word of it. Like the idea of him playing that piano was funny. And that's when it started. Not out of pride, not to prove anything. But because somewhere, deep inside him, something he'd buried a long time ago had started to stir. The music wasn't gone, it was just waiting. After his shift that night, Daniel sat in his tiny apartment on the edge of town. The walls were thin, the radiator clicked like it was still deciding whether to work. And on the table sat a worn music book, its corners curled, the pages soft from time. He had kept it through everything. Through the job changes. Through the years he could barely afford rent. Through the nights he wondered if his best days were already behind him. The book was from college, back when he had a scholarship, back when music was his life, not something he tiptoed around with a dust rag. He opened to a page he knew by heart. His fingers didn't move right at first, awkward, slow. He played on a keyboard he bought years ago at a garage sale. 2 keys didn't even work, but he played anyway. It was messy, stiff, but it was something. And that something kept him up for hours. Every night after that he practiced, quietly, carefully. His neighbours probably thought he was just listening to music. No one knew that the janitor from the hotel was playing Chopin at midnight in an apartment with flickering lights and half a roll of toilet paper left. During the day, nothing changed. He mopped the same floors, took out the same bags of trash, walked past the front desk with his head down, invisible. But inside something was building, and the next time Madison passed him in the lobby, she barely looked. Just a quick nod before heading into the elevator. She had forgotten the conversation. He hadn't, because her laugh had stuck with him, not in a bitter way, but in the way someone keeps a match they didn't ask for, just in case. Daniel didn't want applause, he didn't want revenge, he just wanted the music to come back to life. For him, for the part of himself that still remembered who he used to be. So he kept playing, each night a little longer, each note a little clearer, until one day something changed at the hotel, and he knew his moment was coming. The hotel had been planning its annual holiday fundraiser for weeks, a black tie event, live music, catered food, big donors, and even a silent auction. It was the kind of evening where every wine glass matched, and nobody looked at their watch. They had hired a jazz trio to play, smooth, polished, well-reviewed. One of those bands that knew how to fill a room without getting in the way. But on the morning of the event, the hotel received a call. The pianist had gotten sick, fever, sore throat, the whole thing. And just like that, the trio was down to 2. Madison wasn't pleased. She paced in the lobby with her phone pressed to her ear, voice clipped, brows furrowed. Staff whispered about backup options, maybe a playlist, maybe just let the 2 musicians carry the evening. Daniel was vacuuming a hallway near the ballroom when he overheard a piece of the conversation. He paused, not because he thought he would be asked. That was never going to happen. But because part of him wondered, what if? He didn't move, just stood there for a moment staring at the ballroom doors. Then slowly he walked away and went back to work. That night the guests began arriving just before sunset. Black suits, sparkling dresses, expensive cologne and laughter that echoed off the marble floors. The hotel lobby had never looked more polished. Every surface gleamed like it had been waiting all year for this. Daniel finished his shift just before the music was supposed to begin. He could have gone home, but instead he stood off to the side, watching. His hands were in his pockets. His uniform was still on, but his eyes were fixed on the grand piano. It sat there under soft lighting, untouched, waiting. A few guests asked when the band would start. Someone explained the pianist had fallen ill. The remaining musicians would begin shortly. But the piano, it just sat there. Daniel looked around. No one was watching him. Not yet. He took a deep breath, then he stepped forward. And everything in the room shifted, even if no one noticed it just yet. Daniel walked slowly toward the piano. He didn't rush, didn't look around. Just moved with the quiet confidence of someone who had already made peace with whatever would happen next. Some guests assumed he was staff, maybe going to dust the bench or move something. Others barely noticed him at all. That was the thing about wearing a uniform like his. It made you blend into the background, even when you were standing in the spotlight. He reached the piano, pulled the bench out gently and sat down. For a few seconds, nothing happened. Then he placed his hands on the keys. His palms were dry. His heart was steady. And in the middle of a room full of wealthy strangers and polished silverware, Daniel closed his eyes and started to play. The first notes were soft, slow, barely there. People kept talking at first, laughing, sipping wine, but then the music changed the air. It was not loud, not flashy. It was quiet in a way that made everything else seem too loud. Notes fell like warm rain, steady, honest, imperfect, but full of something that people didn't expect to feel that night. A man standing near the bar paused mid-sentence. A woman looked up from her phone. Even the waitstaff slowed down. And near the back of the room, Madison turned her head. She didn't recognize the music at first, but she recognized the man sitting at the piano, and her eyes narrowed. Because the man playing was not hired, was not scheduled, he was not dressed for the occasion, he was not supposed to be there. But he was, and for some reason, no one was stopping him. The notes flowed like memory, slow, aching, real. There was no showmanship, no flair, just feeling, the kind that reached past words and touched something older than logic. People began to gather, not because of who was playing, but because of how he was playing. Daniel kept his eyes closed, not to block them out, but because he didn't need to see them. He was somewhere else, somewhere where he was 16 again, sitting in a practice room, where his mum was waiting outside with a sandwich and a smile, where the future hadn't fallen apart yet. He played until the room went still. And when he finally lifted his hands from the keys, no one clapped. Not yet. They were still caught in it, like waking from a dream. For a few seconds after Daniel finished, the room stayed frozen. Like no one wanted to be the first to move, or speak, or break whatever had just happened. Then slowly someone near the front clapped. Another person followed. And then the sound spread, growing louder, more certain, until the entire room was filled with it. People weren't just clapping because the music was beautiful. They were clapping because something in it had touched them. It wasn't just notes, it was memory, longing, grief, and something they couldn't quite name. Daniel stood up. He didn't bow, he didn't smile. He just gave a small nod, like a quiet thank you, and turned to leave. But he didn't get far. Madison stepped in front of him. She looked confused, and something else, like she was trying to piece together a puzzle she hadn't even known was there. "I had no idea," she said softly. Daniel gave a small shrug. "Most people don't ask." She blinked, caught off guard by the honesty in his voice. He wasn't angry, he wasn't showing off, he was just being real. Madison glanced at the piano, then back at him. "You used to study music?" He nodded. "A long time ago." There was a pause. She seemed like she wanted to say more, but the words didn't come easily. It was clear she hadn't expected to feel anything tonight, let alone this. "Well," she finally said, "thank you for that." Daniel nodded again. "You're welcome." And then he walked past her, back through the crowd, back into the quiet edges of the building, where the applause couldn't follow, where he could breathe again. But something was different now. Not outside. The lobby still looked the same. The floors were still shiny, the piano still sat under soft lights. What had changed was inside. Because for the first time in years, Daniel didn't feel like a shadow. He had played, and they had listened. Madison watched Daniel walk away. The party continued around her. Guests returned to their drinks. Laughter returned. A waiter passed by with a tray of chocolate desserts, but Madison barely noticed. She stood still for a moment, staring at the piano. It had always been just decoration to her, a luxury prop, something elegant to fill space. She had never once stopped to think about the person who cleaned around it every night, let alone wonder what that person might be carrying. That was the thing about Daniel. He didn't make noise, he didn't complain, he just moved through the building like part of it, reliable, invisible. Until tonight. That music, it hadn't just filled the room, it had shifted something in her, something she didn't have words for yet. Later that night, after the guests had left and the staff began clearing the tables, Madison walked past the piano again. Daniel was gone, but on the bench sat a folded piece of paper. She picked it up. It was a photocopy of a music score, old, faded, corners torn. On the back, in small handwriting, were 3 words. Thank you anyway. She didn't know what that meant, not yet, but it stayed with her. The next morning, Madison asked the front desk manager for Daniel's employee file. Not because she was suspicious, not even because of protocol, she just wanted to know more. Where he'd come from, what his story was, why no one had noticed. There wasn't much in the file. No mention of music, no special notes, just a start date, a reference from a shelter, and the box checked under night shift. That was it, but somehow that said everything. Daniel wasn't the kind of person who talked about himself. He was the kind who let his actions speak. And last night, he had said more with a piano than most people say in a lifetime. Daniel didn't come in the next night. Not because he was avoiding anyone, but because it was his one scheduled day off. He used it like he always did. Laundry, groceries, a walk to the park just to get out of the apartment. He didn't check his phone. He didn't wait for anyone to reach out. To him, that night at the piano had been for something quieter, something personal. Not a performance, not a statement, just a chance to remember who he used to be and maybe still was. But back at the hotel, his name had started to come up. A few guests who had attended the fundraiser asked about the man who played. Some thought he was a surprise guest performer. Others assumed he had been part of the event all along. No one guessed he was the janitor. One of the bellmen said he'd worked there for over a year. Always polite, always early, never said much. The staff started seeing him differently, not in a dramatic way, but people started to pause before walking past him. They nodded when he arrived. They asked how his day was. It wasn't fame. It was respect. And for Daniel, that was more than enough. The following evening, he came in early, not to play, but to get back to his normal routine, back to mops and buckets and quiet. But when he stepped into the lobby, something felt different. The piano bench had been moved slightly, like someone had sat there recently. And on the music stand, resting neatly on top of the keys, was a new copy of sheet music. Clean, unfolded, printed fresh. He walked closer. It was the same piece he had played. And on the corner, in careful handwriting, were 4 simple words. In case you return. He didn't need to guess who left it. Madison wasn't in the lobby. She didn't need to be. Her message was clear. She had heard him. Daniel stood in front of the piano longer than he meant to. He didn't sit. He didn't play. He just looked at the sheet music. Crisp, new, untouched. So different from the one he'd carried for years, with its torn corners and fading ink. Something about it made him feel seen. Not celebrated, not pitied. Just noticed. And that alone felt like more than he'd ever asked for. He put the music back gently, then went to change into his work clothes. The night shift was waiting. Hallways to mop, windows to clean, trash bins to empty. That part of life didn't stop just because someone left a kind gesture behind. But as he worked, something inside him felt lighter. Not because things had changed on the outside, but because for the first time in a long time, he wasn't carrying it all alone. Later that night, as he finished wiping down the front desk, Madison came walking through the lobby. She wasn't in heels this time. No clipboard, no phone glued to her ear. Just a soft sweater, jeans, and a cup of tea in her hand. She spotted him right away. "Hey," she said casually, as if they bumped into each other all the time. "Hey," he replied just as simply. There was a pause, comfortable, not awkward. Then she nodded toward the piano. "You know, I've been here for almost 6 months, and I've never actually heard anyone play that thing, not until you." Daniel smiled. "I guess it was due." She took a sip of her tea, then looked back at him. "What you played, it stayed with me. I didn't expect that." He nodded, not needing to say anything more. She didn't apologise. She didn't go into some long speech about how wrong she had been. She didn't need to. She had left the music. That was enough. Before she walked away, she added softly, "If you ever feel like playing again, I'd like to be here for it." Daniel didn't promise anything, but later that week, after the lobby lights dimmed and the last guest had taken the elevator up to bed, he sat down at the piano again. No one asked him to. No one needed to. The music was simply ready to return. It was a Thursday night. The hotel lobby was nearly empty. The fireplace glowed quietly. The front desk clerk scrolled through the night's reports. Outside, the city moved on as usual. Cars passing, lights blinking, people going places Daniel had stopped dreaming about. But inside, something had shifted. He didn't plan to play that night. He hadn't brought sheet music. He hadn't even looked at the piano during his shift. But as the clock neared midnight, he found himself drifting toward it again. There was no audience, no pressure, just the familiar bench and the old ache in his chest that only music could soften. He sat down, took a breath, and let his fingers move. No big entrances, no fancy chords, just melody. Gentle and slow, like someone remembering something they hadn't thought of in years. A few minutes in, he felt someone sit nearby. He didn't look up, didn't need to. Madison didn't say a word. She sat in the same chair she always passed by without noticing. Her tea rested on the table next to her, untouched. Her posture wasn't stiff like before. She wasn't trying to manage the moment. She was simply there, present. She listened the way people rarely do anymore, not for entertainment, but to understand something unspoken. The piece Daniel played wasn't perfect. His hands trembled now and then. He missed a note. He paused a little too long in one section, but none of that mattered, because it was honest. When he finished, the room didn't fill with applause. There was no spotlight, no crowd, just quiet. And in that quiet, Madison finally spoke. "You don't have to wear the uniform anymore if you don't want to." Daniel looked over, eyebrows slightly raised. She smiled a little awkwardly. "We have a spot. Part-time. Artist in residence. You'd play in the evenings. Nothing fancy, just do what you already do." He didn't answer right away. Not because he was unsure, but because he wanted to feel the moment fully before saying anything. Then he gave a small nod. "All right," he said. She nodded back. Nothing dramatic, nothing loud. Just two people finally seeing each other clearly. And for the first time in years, Daniel felt like the music wasn't the only thing making its way back home. Daniel never became famous. His name didn't end up in the papers. No viral videos, no interviews. Just a small nameplate on the edge of the piano that read "Evening Performances by Daniel Harper." Most guests didn't even notice it, but some did. And they listened, not because they were told to, but because the music had a way of reaching them, softly, steadily, like water finding the cracks in stone. Daniel still showed up early for his shifts, still helped where he was needed, but a few nights a week he traded his gloves for keys, his mop bucket for melody. People came to recognize him, not just as the man who cleaned the lobby, but as the quiet soul who filled it with something more. And Madison? She changed too, not in a dramatic overnight way, but in the small things. The way she slowed down when she walked through the building, the way she greeted staff by name, the way she paused to listen even when there was 100 other things calling her attention. Sometimes when the lobby was nearly empty and the lights were low, she'd sit in that same chair by the piano. No clipboard, no shoes too tight to relax in. Just her and a warm drink, letting the music speak for itself. They never talked much after that night. Not about the past. Not about why it took so long to see each other clearly. They didn't need to. Some stories don't need a big ending, just a quiet one. One where the right people finally meet in the right way. No spotlights, no promises, just a piano, a bench, a second chance, and the sound of someone who had once been forgotten, now being heard. Sometimes the quietest people carry the loudest stories, and sometimes all it takes is one moment, one chance to be heard, to remember who we are beneath the noise of the world. If this story moved you, maybe it's time to listen a little closer to the ones we walk past every day. Thank you for staying with us until the very last moment of this story. Truly, we're grateful you were here. If it touched your heart, please consider giving it a like. And don't forget to subscribe to Rain Inside for more stories that speak softly but stay with you long after they end. Until next time, take care and see you again soon.